12-year-old Zora Johnson gasps for breath at 35,000 feet, her throat burning from a severe allergic reaction. "Water, please," she desperately whispers to flight attendant Patricia Whitfield, who smirks and walks away, deliberately ignoring her. As Zora's breathing becomes more labored, fellow passengers begin to notice, yet the flight attendant continues serving white passengers. Little does Patricia know that watching silently from first class is Malcolm Johnson, Zora's father, and the majority owner of Skyway Airlines, the very company that signs her paychecks. Will justice take flight, or will discrimination continue to soar unchecked? Before we dive into this shocking story of discrimination at 35,000 feet, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in justice and standing up against racism, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more powerful stories that expose the truth. Now, let's see what happens when privilege and prejudice collide in the unfriendly skies. Malcolm Johnson wasn't always the billionaire owner of Skyway Airlines. Born in Harlem to working-class parents, he had climbed his way to success through grit, determination, and an uncanny ability to identify undervalued companies. At 42, he had achieved what most could only dream of, but his greatest treasure remained his 12-year-old daughter, Zora. Since losing his wife, Layla, to an aggressive form of cancer when Zora was just 5, Malcolm had raised their daughter alone, balancing the demands of his growing business empire with the needs of a grieving child. Their bond had only strengthened through adversity, with Malcolm fiercely protective yet determined to raise a daughter who could stand on her own in a world that would often judge her by the color of her skin before the content of her character. Despite his wealth, Malcolm maintained a surprisingly low profile. Few outside business circles recognized his face, a privacy he cultivated deliberately. He had acquired Skyway Airlines just 8 months earlier, seeing potential in the struggling carrier that others had missed. To truly understand a business, you must experience it as a customer, he often told his executive team. This philosophy explained why he and Zora were now flying commercial to Paris rather than taking his private jet. The trip was a celebration of Zora's academic achievements despite her health challenges. She had maintained straight A's throughout the year while managing mild asthma and several allergies that sometimes interfered with her school attendance. They were headed to Paris for a week-long tour of museums, historical sites, and of course, a visit to Disneyland Paris. Malcolm had made a conscious parenting decision for this flight. He booked himself in first class but placed Zora in premium economy. "Privilege should be earned, not expected," he had explained when Zora questioned the arrangement. "You'll be fine on your own for a few hours, and I'll only be a few rows away if you need anything." What neither of them anticipated was encountering Patricia Whitfield, a 15-year veteran flight attendant with a sterling record among supervisors, but a very different reputation among certain passengers. Patricia prided herself on running a tight ship in her cabin section. She followed rules to the letter for some while bending them generously for others, a discrepancy that aligned suspiciously well with passengers' skin color. She had mastered the art of subtle discrimination, the kind that left victims feeling degraded, yet unable to pinpoint exactly why. She also deeply resented the airline's recent change in ownership, having lost several privileges she'd enjoyed under the previous management. As passengers boarded, Patricia's practiced smile remained fixed, while she greeted first-class and white passengers with warm enthusiasm. When Zora approached with her boarding pass, Patricia barely acknowledged her, checking her ticket with a curt seat 14B without the welcome aboard she had offered to the previous passenger. Zora settled into her seat, excited about her first international flight despite the minor rudeness. 2 hours into the flight, she opened a package of cookies from the snack service. Unknown to her, they contained trace amounts of nuts not listed on the package. Within minutes, she felt the first warning signs of an allergic reaction, a slight tingling on her tongue, and a warming sensation in her throat. Being responsible for her health from a young age, Zora recognized the symptoms immediately. She needed water to take her antihistamine medication, which she always carried. When the beverage cart approached, she politely asked Patricia for a cup of water. "I'll get back to you," Patricia replied dismissively, promptly serving the white businessman across the aisle. 10 minutes passed, and Patricia had served every passenger in the vicinity except Zora. The tingling in her mouth was intensifying, and her throat felt increasingly tight. Zora pressed the call button, watching anxiously as the light above her seat illuminated. The symptoms were progressing faster than usual. She pressed the button again, trying to catch Patricia's eye as the flight attendant glanced directly at the call light before turning away to chat with another crew member. By now, Zora's breathing had become labored. She pressed the call button a third time, her small hand trembling as panic began to set in. Patricia Whitfield noticed the illuminated call button above seat 14B for the third time and rolled her eyes. With deliberate slowness, she walked to Zora's row and, without asking what the young girl needed, simply reached up and turned off the call button. "The button is for emergencies only," she stated coldly, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Not for impatient children." As she turned to walk away, Zora managed to whisper through her increasingly constricted throat, "Please, water, allergy." Patricia paused, looking down at the young black girl with thinly veiled contempt. "You'll have to wait until the next service round like everyone else." She moved away, unaware that several passengers had witnessed the exchange. At the galley, Patricia muttered to her colleague, Lisa Monroe, "These people and their attitude. Always expecting special treatment." Lisa looked uncomfortable but said nothing, having seen this behavior from Patricia before. In row 15, Dorothy Chambers, a 72-year-old white woman with silver hair and kind eyes, watched the scene with growing concern. The child in front of her was clearly in distress, her breathing becoming audibly labored. "Excuse me," Dorothy called out as Patricia passed by again. "That young girl seems to need help. She mentioned an allergy." Patricia's smile was automatic, but didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am, I assure you everything is under control. Some passengers simply need to learn patience." Across the aisle, Marcus Rivera, a 34-year-old marketing executive, had been watching the situation unfold with increasing discomfort. Discreetly, he took out his phone and began recording, keeping the device partially hidden behind the in-flight magazine. Zora's condition was deteriorating quickly. Her face had begun to flush, and she was taking rapid, shallow breaths. The antihistamine pill sat in her palm, useless without water to swallow it. A young woman in the seat next to her finally noticed her distress. "Are you okay?" she asked, alarmed by Zora's appearance. Zora could only shake her head. The woman immediately offered her own half-finished bottle of water. "Here, take this." Zora gratefully accepted, swallowing her medication, but the reaction had progressed too far for the antihistamine alone to counter it effectively. She needed her emergency epinephrine pen, which was in her backpack in the overhead compartment. Meanwhile, in first class, Malcolm Johnson was absorbed in reviewing acquisition proposals on his laptop, trusting that his daughter was safely enjoying the flight just a few rows behind. Patricia returned to the galley area where the junior flight supervisor, Carter Wilson, was preparing coffee for the first-class cabin. "Having trouble in economy?" he asked, having noticed the repeated call button from Zora's seat. Patricia waved dismissively. "Just an entitled kid making demands, nothing I can't handle." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You know how they can be. No respect for authority." Carter glanced toward the economy cabin, hesitating. New to his supervisory role and eager to maintain good relationships with the senior crew, he nodded noncommittally and continued with his tasks. The recording on Marcus's phone had captured Patricia's neglect of Zora while promptly serving white passengers. It also caught a damning exchange as Patricia passed by his row. "They never teach their kids manners," she murmured to another attendant, with a pointed glance toward Zora. Summoning courage from deepening desperation, Zora managed to stand on shaky legs as Patricia passed by again. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible as her throat continued to constrict. "I need help." Then, with the directness of a child who had seen too much in her young life, she added, "Is it because I'm black? What would you do if you witnessed such blatant discrimination? Comment number 1 if you think Zora was right to speak up, or number 2 if you think she should have remained quiet to avoid confrontation. Like this video if you believe no child should ever face discrimination for their race, and subscribe. to our channel for more eye-opening stories of courage in the face of injustice. The question is, will anyone stand up for Zora as her condition worsens, or will Patricia's prejudice go unchallenged at 35,000 feet? Let's continue this shocking, true story. Patricia's face contorted with indignation at Zora's question. "Excuse me?" she snapped, loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "How dare you make such an accusation? You are causing a disturbance on this aircraft, and I will not tolerate it." She loomed over the 12-year-old, using her physical presence as intimidation. "If you continue this behavior, I will have security waiting for you when we land in Paris." The threat hung in the air, shocking nearby passengers. Dorothy Chambers from row 15 unbuckled her seatbelt. "Now see here," the elderly woman said, rising to her feet despite the seatbelt sign. "This child is clearly unwell and asking for water. What possible reason could there be to refuse her?" Patricia turned to Dorothy, her professional mask slipping further. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. I am handling this situation." Marcus Rivera stood up as well, phone still recording. "No, you're not handling it. You're making it worse. The girl needs medical attention." The cabin began to divide. Some passengers watched in uncomfortable silence, while others began to speak up. A businessman in a tailored suit asked loudly why the disruption wasn't being dealt with, while a college student announced that she was a pre-med major and thought the child was having an allergic reaction. Patricia reached for the cabin phone. "Captain, this is Patricia. We have a disruptive minor in economy who is inciting other passengers. Request security protocol." She emphasized the word minor, as if Zora's age made her complaint less valid. What happened next changed the trajectory of the incident entirely. As the argument escalated around her, Zora's airways continued to constrict. The antihistamine hadn't been enough to stop the reaction, and the adrenaline of confrontation accelerated her symptoms. Her lips began to turn faintly blue, and with a small, frightened gasp, she collapsed into the aisle. For a moment, silence fell over the cabin. Then chaos erupted. "She can't breathe," someone shouted. A man in his 50s pushed through the crowd that had formed. "I'm a doctor. Let me through." Dr. Alan Michaels knelt beside Zora, checking her pulse and airway. He looked up at Patricia, who stood frozen at the sight of the collapsed child. "This child is having a severe anaphylactic reaction. I need the emergency medical kit now." Patricia hesitated, her mind racing with the implications. She hadn't expected the situation to escalate to a genuine medical emergency. We need to verify that." "Now!" Dr. Michaels shouted, breaking through her hesitation. "Or this child could die." Carter Wilson, the junior flight supervisor who had been watching uncertainly from the galley, sprang into action. He rushed to retrieve the emergency kit while radioing for any additional medical personnel on board. In first class, Olivia Chen, a flight attendant who had served Malcolm his second cup of coffee, received an urgent message through her earpiece. "Mr. Johnson." She approached his seat discreetly. "I believe there may be a situation involving your daughter in economy. There's a medical emergency with a young girl." Malcolm's head snapped up, his calm demeanor instantly replaced by alarm. He closed his laptop in one swift motion and was on his feet before Olivia finished speaking. "Where?" he demanded. When Malcolm reached the economy section, he found a crowd gathered around an aisle seat. Pushing through with determined strength, he saw his daughter lying on the floor, a stranger administering an injection from the emergency kit. "Zora!" he shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. "I'm her father. What's happening?" Dr. Michaels looked up, relieved to see a parent. "Severe allergic reaction. I've given her epinephrine from the kit. Her airway was closing, but she should start improving shortly." Malcolm held his daughter's hand, his usual composed business persona shattered by parental fear. "She has allergies. She carries medication." His voice trailed off as he noticed Zora's unused epinephrine pen still in her backpack, which someone had retrieved from the overhead bin. He looked up, his gaze hardening as it landed on Patricia, who stood a few feet away, her face a mask of professional concern that hadn't been there minutes before. "What happened here?" Malcolm demanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Why wasn't my daughter given assistance when she first showed symptoms? Patricia stepped forward, her demeanor completely transformed. Sir, we responded as quickly as possible when we realized the severity of the situation. These things can escalate very quickly and… That's not true, Dorothy Chambers interrupted. This child was begging for water for her medication, and this flight attendant ignored her repeatedly. Marcus held up his phone. I have it all on video. She deliberately ignored her while serving everyone else. Patricia's face paled, but she maintained her defensive stance. Sir, your daughter was being disruptive and making accusations. I was following protocol for unruly passengers. Malcolm rose to his full height, his voice dangerously quiet. My daughter, who is having a life-threatening allergic reaction, was unruly? Patricia, still unaware of who exactly she was speaking to, attempted to regain control of the narrative. Sir, I understand you're upset, but you weren't present for the entire situation. Perhaps your daughter didn't clearly communicate the seriousness of her condition. The passengers who had witnessed everything erupted in objections, but Malcolm raised a hand, silencing them with the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms. He looked directly at Patricia. I think it's time we had a proper conversation about what happened here. Malcolm Johnson stood at his full height, his tailored suit and commanding presence drawing all eyes in the crowded economy cabin. The epinephrine was beginning to work. Zora's breathing had eased slightly, though Dr. Michaels continued to monitor her closely. Before we continue this conversation, Malcolm said, his voice calm but resonating with controlled fury, perhaps I should introduce myself properly. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a business card, handing it to Patricia with deliberate slowness. Malcolm Johnson, majority owner and chairman of Skyway Airlines. The color drained from Patricia's face as she stared at the card, then back at Malcolm. Around them, passengers murmured in surprise. Some took out phones to capture the moment. Carter Wilson, the junior flight supervisor, pushed forward through the crowd, his earlier reluctance to get involved suddenly replaced by desperate damage control. Mr. Johnson, sir, I had no idea you were on board. I assure you this is not representative of our standard service. Malcolm ignored him, keeping his eyes fixed on Patricia. I fly on my airlines regularly, usually unannounced, to experience the service as our customers do. Today I arranged for my daughter to fly in economy while I worked in first class. His voice remained measured, but ice had crept into his tone. I never imagined that decision would nearly cost her life. Patricia fumbled for words, her usual confidence shattered. Mr. Johnson, there's been a misunderstanding. I wouldn't. If I had known who she was. If you had known who she was, Malcolm repeated softly, dangerously. So you're admitting that her identity would have changed your treatment of her? Before Patricia could respond, a notification sound pinged from several phones throughout the cabin. The video that Marcus had been recording had already been uploaded to social media through the plane's Wi-Fi and was beginning to circulate. This is trending, someone announced. Skyway racism is gaining traction. Patricia looked around wildly, noticing how other crew members were physically distancing themselves from her. Lisa Monroe, who had witnessed Patricia's earlier comments in the galley, now stood by Zora's side helping Dr. Michaels. No one wanted to be associated with what was rapidly becoming a PR nightmare. Malcolm knelt beside his daughter again, stroking her hair gently. How are you feeling, Butterfly? He asked, using his special nickname for her. Zora managed a weak smile. Better, she whispered hoarsely. Throat still hurts. Malcolm turned to Dr. Michaels. Will she need further medical attention? The doctor nodded. The epinephrine has stabilized her for now, but she should be seen by a hospital in Paris. Anaphylactic reactions can sometimes have a biphasic response, with symptoms returning hours later. Malcolm nodded his understanding, then stood again, addressing Carter. I want a full incident report from every crew member involved, separately documented. He turned to the passengers who had witnessed the events. For those who recorded what happened or are willing to provide statements, the airline will be in contact to gather your accounts. Patricia, desperately trying to salvage the situation, stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson, please allow me to explain. There were many demands from multiple passengers, and in the confusion, I may have misunderstood the urgency of your daughter's request. It was never my intention." Malcolm cut her off with a raised hand. "Ms. Whitfield, at this moment I'm not interested in your explanations. My priority is my daughter's well-being." He turned to Carter. "Ms. Whitfield is relieved of her duties for the remainder of this flight. She is to remain in the crew rest area until we land." Carter nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." A beep sounded over the intercom, followed by the captain's voice. "This is Captain Reynolds speaking. I've been informed of a medical situation in the main cabin. Is everything under control, or should we divert to the nearest airport?" Malcolm took the cabin phone. "Captain, this is Malcolm Johnson, chairman of Skyway. The situation is stabilizing, but I need to speak with you." Minutes later, the captain himself appeared in the economy cabin, an unprecedented occurrence during a routine flight. He assessed the situation quickly, speaking briefly with Malcolm and Dr. Michaels. "We can make an emergency landing in Frankfurt," he offered. "It would delay our arrival in Paris by several hours, but we could get immediate medical attention." Malcolm looked at Dr. Michaels, who was still monitoring Zora. "What do you recommend, doctor?" "She's stabilizing well," Dr. Michaels replied. "As long as we monitor her closely and have access to another dose of epinephrine if needed. Continuing to Paris should be safe. They have excellent medical facilities there." Malcolm nodded. "Then we continue to Paris, Captain, but I want senior crew members attending to this section for the remainder of the flight, and I'll be staying here with my daughter." As Patricia was escorted to the crew rest area, passengers watched in stunned silence. The power dynamics had shifted completely. The woman who had wielded her authority so callously minutes before was now being removed from view, while the child she had dismissed was revealed to be the daughter of the airline's owner. Social media was already ablaze with the story, an object lesson in the danger of discrimination in the age of smartphones and Wi-Fi. Malcolm settled into the empty seat next to Zora, pulling out his phone to make arrangements for medical care upon their arrival in Paris. Around them, the cabin buzzed with whispered conversations, passengers processing the dramatic turn of events they had just witnessed. None of them realized that this incident was only the beginning of a much larger storm brewing within Skyway Airlines, one that would expose deep-rooted problems far beyond a single flight attendant's behavior. As the flight continued toward Paris, Malcolm held his daughter's hand while processing the magnitude of what had just happened. The cabin had reorganized. Several passengers had offered to switch seats so Malcolm and Zora could sit together, comfortably. Dr. Michaels remained nearby, periodically checking on Zora's vital signs. Malcolm couldn't help but consider how differently this scenario might have played out for a child without his resources and connections. If Zora wasn't my daughter, he thought, would anyone have stood up for her at all? His mind drifted back to his own childhood, long before his wealth had afforded him protection against society's prejudices. Growing up in Harlem, he had faced countless micro and macro aggressions, from being followed in stores to being pulled over by police for driving a car that looked too expensive for someone like him. Money and success had insulated him somewhat, but never completely. And now his daughter was learning the same harsh lesson, at 35,000 feet, with nowhere to escape. Zora stirred beside him, her eyes clearer now that the medication had taken full effect. "Dad," she whispered, her voice still raspy from the reaction. "Did I do something wrong?" The question pierced Malcolm's heart. "No, Butterfly. Absolutely not. You did everything right. You asked for help when you needed it, and you spoke up when you weren't being treated fairly." She looked down at her hands. "But if you hadn't been here," Malcolm squeezed her fingers gently. "That's why we have to change the system, not just individual behaviors. One person shouldn't have the power to deny another basic human decency." Around them, the economy cabin had divided into distinct factions. Most passengers expressed outrage over Patricia's behavior, sharing their own observations with each other and on social media. A smaller group, however, defended the flight attendant, suggesting that Zora must have been rude or unclear, that Patricia couldn't possibly have known about the severity of the allergy. or that race had nothing to do with the incident. A middle-aged, white man in a business suit leaned across the aisle toward Malcolm. "Listen, I'm sure this has been unpleasant, but making it about race seems excessive. I've seen flight attendants have bad days with all kinds of passengers." Malcolm regarded him coolly. "When you've experienced racial discrimination your entire life, you develop a sixth sense for it. My daughter recognized it immediately, even through her medical distress." The man retreated, uncomfortable with the direct confrontation of his privilege. At the front of the aircraft, Captain Reynolds made an urgent call to Skyway headquarters in Atlanta. The airline's senior leadership team had been jolted from their routine day by news of the unfolding PR disaster. Social media monitoring had flagged the viral video, which was spreading rapidly with hashtags like Skyway racism and Justice for Zora, gaining traction. In the crew rest area, Patricia sat alone, alternating between indignation and panic. She took out her phone, searching for the viral video to assess the damage to her reputation. As she watched herself ignore Zora's repeated requests while promptly serving white passengers, the reality of her actions began to sink in. But rather than accept responsibility, her mind worked frantically to construct a defense. Carter Wilson appeared at the curtain, his expression tense. "Patricia, I wanted to check on you." She looked up hopefully. "Carter, you saw what happened. That child was being difficult from the beginning. You'll back me up, right?" Carter hesitated, then sat across from her. "Patricia, I'll do what I can, but the video doesn't look good, and now with Mr. Johnson involved." He lowered his voice. "I just got off the phone with HR. They've pulled your personnel file. There have been other complaints, Patricia. Complaints with similar patterns." "What are you saying?" He avoided her eyes. "I'm saying we need to be strategic about how we handle this when we land. I'll support you as much as I can, but my first duty is to the airline." Patricia watched him leave, suddenly aware that her 15-year career hung in the balance. What she didn't know was that Carter had already made a separate call to human resources, distancing himself from her actions and emphasizing his own attempts to intervene. Zora sat quietly, processing her emotions. The physical symptoms of her allergic reaction were subsiding, but the psychological impact remained raw. She had always been taught to stand up for herself, but facing discrimination so blatant, so public, and so dangerous had shaken her confidence. "Everyone was watching, Dad," she said softly. "Everyone saw her treat me that way, and most of them did nothing until I collapsed." Malcolm nodded, understanding all too well. That's the hardest lesson, Butterfly. Injustice thrives in silence. That's why speaking up matters, even when your voice shakes. He pointed to Marcus, who was still documenting the aftermath on his phone. "But look, some people did stand up. That gentleman recorded everything. The doctor helped immediately. That elderly woman challenged the flight attendant. Change happens one ally at a time." In Atlanta, news of the incident had reached the executive floor. Senior Vice President of Operations Richard Davis assembled an emergency response team, his focus entirely on damage control rather than addressing the underlying issue. "Get our legal team on standby," he instructed his assistant, "and call our PR firm. We need a statement ready the moment this hits mainstream media." His assistant hesitated. "Sir, Mr. Johnson has been trying to reach you directly." Davis froze. Having the owner's daughter at the center of a racial discrimination incident complicated matters tremendously. "Tell him I'm gathering all the facts and will call him back within the hour." Throughout the cabin, passengers continued to discuss the incident in hushed tones. The video had garnered over 50,000 views already, and news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. What none of them realized was that this incident would become a watershed moment, not just for Skyway Airlines, but for how corporations address systemic discrimination within their ranks. What would you do if you were Malcolm Johnson? Comment number 1 if you would use your power to immediately fire Patricia, or number 2 if you would address the deeper systemic issues at the airline. Hit the like button if you believe corporations should be held accountable for the discriminatory actions of their employees, and subscribe for more stories that expose injustice in unexpected places. The question remains: Will Malcolm seek personal revenge for his daughter's suffering? Or will he use this painful incident to create lasting change within his company? Continue watching to see how this powerful businessman responds when discrimination hits this close to home. The pilot's announcement that they were beginning their descent into Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport created a ripple of tension through the cabin. For most passengers, landing signaled the end of their journey. For Malcolm and Zora Johnson, it was merely transitioning from one battlefield to another. Malcolm's phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from airline executives, board members, and his personal assistant, who had already arranged for a medical team to meet them at the gate. What he hadn't anticipated was the media presence that awaited them. As the plane taxied to the gate, Captain Reynolds received an urgent communication from the control tower. Skyway 477, be advised there are police authorities requesting to board upon arrival. Also, please be aware there is significant media presence in the terminal. The captain relayed this information to Malcolm, who nodded grimly. Not unexpected. The video has gone viral. In the crew rest area, Patricia was formulating her defense strategy. She had convinced Carter to visit her again, under the guise of checking on her well-being. "Carter, you know I've always been professional," she insisted, her voice low and urgent. "This is being blown completely out of proportion. That girl never clearly stated she was having a medical emergency." Carter shifted uncomfortably. "Patricia, I saw the video. Multiple passengers heard her say she was having an allergic reaction." "Videos can be misleading," she countered. "They don't show the whole story. We need to present a united front. Your career is tied to this too, you know." Carter's ambition wrestled with his conscience. Though he hadn't directly contributed to Zora's distress, his failure to intervene made him complicit. "I'll state what I observed," he said carefully. "Nothing more, nothing less." As he left, Patricia didn't realize he had already decided to protect his own career at any cost. Meanwhile, two flight attendants approached Malcolm discreetly. "Mr. Johnson," the first one said, introducing herself as Melissa Tanaka. "I want you to know that many of us have witnessed concerning behavior from Patricia before. There have been other incidents with passengers of color that didn't escalate this far." The second attendant, James Wilson, nodded in agreement. "We've tried to report it through proper channels, but nothing ever seems to happen." Malcolm studied them thoughtfully. "I appreciate your honesty. I'll need formal statements from both of you when we land." As the plane touched down, Zora demonstrated remarkable composure for a 12-year-old who had nearly died and then become the center of international attention. "Dad," she said, "all those people waiting at the gate, do I have to talk to them?" Malcolm put his arm around her shoulders. "Absolutely not. Your only job is to get medical attention and then rest at the hotel. I'll handle everything else." The aircraft doors opened, and French police officers boarded first, followed by airport officials. The captain had requested that all other passengers remain seated until the situation was addressed. A police commander approached Malcolm. "Monsieur Johnson, I am Commander Laurent. We received reports of a serious incident aboard this aircraft. We need to take statements from all involved parties." Malcolm nodded. "My primary concern is getting my daughter medical attention. She suffered a severe allergic reaction that was exacerbated by the negligence of your staff member." As if on cue, the medical team Malcolm had arranged arrived at the aircraft door, led by a doctor from the American Hospital of Paris. Commander Laurent nodded his understanding. "Of course, we can take your statements at the hospital if necessary. However, we must also speak with the flight attendant in question." Patricia was escorted from the crew rest area by airport security, seeing the police, media cameras visible. Through the jet bridge windows and the stony faces of her colleagues, the gravity of her situation finally hit her. Still, she attempted to maintain her composure, walking with her head high as she approached the commander. "I am Patricia Whitfield, the flight attendant in question. There has been a misunderstanding that has been grossly exaggerated." Before the commander could respond, Patricia continued, her voice rising defensively. "I have been a dedicated employee of this airline for 15 years with an exemplary record. I followed all protocols correctly today." Malcolm watched this performance with cold assessment. He had encountered this type of deflection countless times in his business career. people unwilling to acknowledge their mistakes even when confronted with irrefutable evidence. As passengers were finally permitted to disembark, many stopped to express support for Zora. Dorothy Chambers, the elderly woman who had first spoken up, squeezed the girl's hand. "You were very brave, dear. Very brave indeed." Marcus Rivera approached Malcolm, offering his contact information. "I've preserved the original video and uploaded it to secure cloud storage. Your legal team can contact me anytime." The gratitude Malcolm felt toward these strangers who had stood up for his daughter brought unexpected emotion to his throat. "Thank you," he said simply. "It matters more than you know." As Malcolm and Zora were escorted toward the medical team, Patricia made her most desperate move. "Mr. Johnson," she called out, "this is completely unfair. Your daughter was being disruptive and making false accusations against me. This is a case of reverse racism, pure and simple. You're using your power to threaten my job because of your own prejudice." The terminal fell silent at this audacious claim. Malcolm paused, turning slowly to face Patricia. Several phones recorded the moment, capturing his measured response. "Ms. Whitfield, the evidence speaks for itself. This isn't about power or privilege. It's about basic human decency and doing your job without bias." He gestured toward the exit. "I suggest you save your statements for the formal investigation that will follow." With that, he turned away, guiding Zora toward the medical team, waiting to transport her to the hospital. As they left, Patricia was escorted to a private room for questioning by French authorities, her face a mask of indignation that barely concealed her growing fear. The private room at the American Hospital of Paris offered a momentary sanctuary from the media storm that was building outside. Doctors had thoroughly examined Zora, administered additional medication to prevent a biphasic reaction, and recommended overnight observation as a precaution. Malcolm sat beside his daughter's bed, his laptop open as he managed the crisis remotely while refusing to leave her side. "How are the tweets looking?" Zora asked, glancing at his screen. Malcolm smiled at her resilience. At 12, she already understood the power of social media in shaping narratives. "The hashtag #Skyway Racism is trending in 17 countries, he replied honestly. "And there's a new one gaining traction too. Gaka Zora strong." She nodded thoughtfully. "Are people believing her or me?" "The video speaks for itself, Butterfly. But in situations like this, people often see what they want to see. That's why systemic change is so much harder than firing one person." On his screen, Malcolm could see the Skyway Airlines stock price dropping in real time as investors reacted to the negative publicity. The company had lost nearly 8% of its market value in just 4 hours. His phone rang again. This time, the lead counsel for the airline. "Malcolm, we need to issue a statement immediately. The board is pushing for something along the lines of isolated incident and not reflective of company values." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "That boilerplate response isn't going to cut it, David. I've been reviewing the company's records since we landed. There have been 27 formal complaints against Patricia Whitfield in the past 3 years, 11 of which explicitly mentioned racial bias. All of them were dismissed or buried." There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end. "I wasn't aware of that data." "Exactly the problem," Malcolm responded. "Prepare a statement acknowledging the incident and announcing a full investigation into not just this incident but our entire complaint handling process. No platitudes, no deflection." As he hung up, a news alert flashed across his screen. Patricia Whitfield had given an exclusive interview to a conservative news outlet, positioning herself as the victim of cancel culture and corporate politics. "I've served passengers of all backgrounds with professionalism for 15 years, she told the interviewer, tears in her eyes. "This wealthy executive is using his power to destroy my career because his daughter didn't get special treatment." The interviewer nodded sympathetically. "So, you're saying this has nothing to do with race?" Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Absolutely not. If anything, I'm being discriminated against now because I'm white. They're making an example of me to appear progressive." Malcolm closed the video, disgusted but not surprised. He had seen this playbook before, Deny, deflect, and then claim reverse discrimination. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Carter Wilson just gave a statement to the press distancing himself from Patricia and claiming he tried to intervene. The betrayal was coming from all sides now. In the hospital room, Zora was speaking with a child psychologist Malcolm had arranged to help her process the trauma. "I kept thinking, if I just ask nicely enough, she'll help me," Zora explained. "But nothing I did mattered because of how she saw me." The psychologist nodded. "That's a heavy realization for someone your age. How are you feeling about it now?" Zora considered the question seriously. "Sad, angry, but mostly determined. Dad always says we can't control how people treat us, only how we respond." Outside the hospital, journalists from around the world had gathered, sensing that this story had all the elements of a viral phenomenon: race, class, corporate power, and the inherent drama of injustice captured on video. Celebrity tweets were amplifying the story further. A famous black actress posted, "What happened to watch Zora Johnson happens to black children every day without cameras rolling. This time, there's proof." Skyway racism. A prominent civil rights attorney offered to represent the Johnsons pro bono if they decided to pursue legal action. Meanwhile, at Skyway's headquarters in Atlanta, emergency meetings continued through the night despite the time difference. The company's crisis management team had divided into two camps: those who wanted to terminate Patricia immediately as a sacrificial offering to public opinion, and those who feared legal repercussions if they acted too hastily. Richard Davis, the senior VP of operations, advocated for the moderate approach. "We need to follow proper procedures. If we fire her without due process, she could sue for wrongful termination." The chief marketing officer slammed her hand on the table. "Every minute we don't act decisively, our brand takes another hit. The video has been viewed 12 million times in the last 6 hours. In Paris, Malcolm faced his own dilemma. As a businessman, he understood the complex legal and corporate considerations. As a father, he wanted immediate justice for his daughter. As a black man with a platform, he recognized the responsibility to address the systemic issues rather than just the individual case. His phone rang again, this time with a call from Imani Washington, Skyway's recently hired Chief Diversity Officer, a position that had been largely ceremonial until now. "Malcolm, I've been reviewing our internal handling of discrimination complaints," she said without preamble. "It's worse than we thought. There's a clear pattern of dismissing or downplaying reports, especially when they come from passengers of color." Malcolm wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. "Send me everything you have. This isn't just about Patricia Whitfield anymore." Back at the Charles de Gaulle airport, French authorities had finished questioning Patricia and released her to the Skyway crew hotel with instructions not to leave Paris while the investigation continued. In her hotel room, she received a call from a board member, Harrison Reynolds, who had always been skeptical of Malcolm's leadership. "Patricia, this is unfortunate timing, but you need to know you have allies within the company. Johnson's only been in charge for 8 months. Many of us feel he's taking the airline in the wrong direction." Patricia clutched this lifeline of support. "What should I do?" "Stay the course with your statement that this has nothing to do with race. We're working behind the scenes to manage this situation in a way that protects the airline's reputation without sacrificing loyal employees." What Patricia didn't know was that Reynolds was recording the call, planning to use her responses to protect himself regardless of the outcome. Back at the hospital, Malcolm made a decision. Rather than responding to Patricia's interview directly, he would focus on systemic change. He began drafting a comprehensive plan to transform Skyway's culture, starting with a complete overhaul of how discrimination complaints were handled. As he worked through the night while Zora slept, he didn't realize that the boardroom politics were already in motion, with several members plotting to use this crisis to challenge his control of the airline he had saved from bankruptcy. The morning news cycle brought fresh challenges, as Patricia Whitfield's interview gained traction in certain media circles. Conservative pundit Blake Thornton devoted a 15-minute segment on his popular show to what he called the witch hunt against a dedicated flight attendant. "What we're witnessing is the weaponization of race by the wealthy and powerful," Thornton declared to his millions of viewers. A billionaire using his influence to destroy a working-class woman's career over what amounts to a service misunderstanding. He brought on workplace experts who questioned whether Zora had clearly communicated her medical emergency and speculated that Malcolm was exploiting the situation to divert attention from Skyway's financial troubles. Malcolm watched the segment from his hotel suite in Paris, where they had moved after Zora was discharged from the hospital. His daughter was resting in the adjoining room, still recovering from her physical and emotional ordeal. "They're trying to rewrite history," he said to his chief of staff, Vanessa Chen, who had flown in overnight. "Even with video evidence, they're gaslighting the public." Vanessa nodded grimly. "It's the standard playbook, but we have something they don't: the truth and a platform to share it." Malcolm's private jet was being prepared for their return to Atlanta, where he had called an emergency board meeting. Before leaving Paris, he had given a single interview to a respected journalist, focusing not on Patricia specifically, but on the larger issues of accountability and corporate culture. "This incident reveals a system that failed at multiple levels," he had stated. "My focus now is ensuring that no passenger ever experiences what my daughter did, regardless of their race or who their parents might be." Upon landing in Atlanta, Malcolm went directly to Skyway headquarters, where the board members were already assembled. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as he entered. Harrison Reynolds spoke first, his tone conciliatory, but his words carefully chosen. "Malcolm, we all agree this situation was unfortunate. However, some of us have concerns about your public statements. They could be interpreted as admitting corporate liability before our legal team has fully assessed the situation." Malcolm surveyed the room, noting which board members nodded in agreement with Reynolds. "I appreciate your concerns, Harrison, but let me be clear. I'm not here to debate whether we have a problem. The evidence is irrefutable. I'm here to outline how we're going to fix it." He distributed tablets containing a comprehensive report compiled by Imani Washington's team. "This document contains evidence of 63 discrimination complaints filed against our airline in the past 2 years. 80% were dismissed without thorough investigation. 40% involved the same 10 employees, including Patricia Whitfield." The board members exchanged uneasy glances as they scrolled through the damning data. Malcolm continued, "I've assembled a task force to overhaul our hiring, training, and complaint resolution processes. I'm also implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, effective immediately." Reynolds cleared his throat. "While these initiatives sound admirable, they represent significant operational changes that should be subject to board approval. Furthermore, regarding Ms. Whitfield specifically, terminating her employment without due process could expose us to legal action." "I'm not suggesting we bypass due process," Malcolm countered. "I'm insisting that we actually follow it for once, instead of burying complaints as has been the practice." Another board member, Victoria Hartwell, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Malcolm, while I support addressing these issues, your personal involvement creates a conflict of interest. Perhaps you should recuse yourself from decisions regarding this specific incident." Malcolm's expression remained neutral, though he recognized the strategy at play. "Victoria, my daughter's experience brought this issue to light, but the data shows it's far from isolated. Would you suggest I recuse myself from addressing all 63 incidents in this report?" Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. He glanced down to see a news alert. "Breaking. Skyway board member Harrison Reynolds implicated in discrimination cover-up." Malcolm looked up to find all eyes on him. "It seems our discussion has been overtaken by events. Perhaps we should all review the latest developments before continuing." He turned the tablet to display a breaking news story. An anonymous whistleblower had leaked emails showing that Reynolds had personally intervened to protect Patricia Whitfield from disciplinary action following previous discrimination complaints. His direct quote in one email read, "These types of complaints are bad for morale and rarely amount to anything substantial. Handle it quietly." Reynolds' face flushed with anger. "This is an outrageous breach of confidentiality. Those emails are being taken completely out of context." Malcolm remained calm. "Context is exactly what we need, Harrison. which is why I've called for a complete audit of all discrimination complaints and how they were handled. The boardroom erupted into chaos, with members talking over each other. Some demanded to know the whistleblower's identity, while others began distancing themselves from Reynolds. Malcolm waited for the noise to subside before speaking again. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me be clear about what's happening here. Some of you see this as a PR problem to manage. I see it as a moral failing that nearly cost my daughter her life and has undoubtedly harmed countless other passengers." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket in a gesture of finality. "I did not save this airline from bankruptcy 8 months ago, only to watch it destroy itself from within. Those who cannot embrace a culture of accountability and respect have no place in this company's future." Back at the Skyway Crew Hotel, Patricia received a call from the airline's HR department, informing her that she was suspended pending investigation. Her union representative advised her to avoid further media appearances, but Patricia, fueled by Thornton's supportive coverage and Reynolds' earlier assurances, decided on a different approach. She scheduled a press conference for the following morning, planning to position herself as a scapegoat for deeper corporate issues. What she didn't know was that 3 other flight attendants had now come forward with accounts of witnessing her discriminatory behavior toward passengers of color. Meanwhile, Zora was recovering at the Johnson family home, surrounded by supportive messages from around the world. Children her age had started sharing their own experiences with discrimination using Kaka Zora Taught Me, creating a movement that extended far beyond the original incident. Malcolm returned home that evening, exhausted but resolute. Zora was sitting in their family room reading through some of the messages of support. "Dad," she asked as he entered, "what's going to happen to that flight attendant?" Malcolm sat beside her, considering how to answer. "The company will follow a proper investigation process. But the bigger question is what's going to happen to the system that protected her behavior for so long." Zora nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about something you always say about your business strategy." "What's that, Butterfly?" "That real change doesn't come from removing one bad apple. It comes from examining why the bad apple wasn't caught earlier." Malcolm smiled with pride at his daughter's wisdom. "That's exactly right. And that's why this fight is going to be much bigger than Patricia Whitfield." What neither of them knew was that the next morning would bring a new crisis. As board members aligned with Reynolds planned a financial maneuver to dilute Malcolm's controlling interest in the airline, attempting to force his hand before his reforms could take root. Can you imagine facing such corporate resistance when trying to address clear discrimination? Comment number 1 if you think Malcolm should fight to maintain control of the airline, or number 2 if you believe he should sell his shares and start fresh elsewhere. Hit the like button if you believe corporate boards should be held accountable for enabling discriminatory practices, and subscribe to our channel for more stories about courageous individuals fighting systemic injustice. The question now becomes, will Malcolm prevail against the entrenched powers trying to preserve the status quo, or will those who protected Patricia for years succeed in their boardroom coup? Stay tuned as this powerful story continues to unfold. Malcolm Johnson arrived at Skyway headquarters early the next morning, determined to address the brewing boardroom rebellion head-on. His chief of staff, Vanessa Chen, had worked through the night with their legal team to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a contentious meeting. "They've called an emergency vote to dilute your shares," Vanessa explained as they walked through the executive wing. "They're claiming it's necessary to stabilize the company after the recent market losses." Malcolm nodded, his expression resolute. Classic playbook. Create a crisis, then use it to seize control. He paused at the boardroom door. "Let's see what else we can uncover about who's really behind this." Inside his office, Malcolm assembled a trusted team of executives who had been with him since he acquired the airline. Along with Vanessa and Imani Washington, the chief diversity officer, he had brought in David Rios from legal and Sarah Okafor, a data analyst whose expertise in uncovering patterns had proved invaluable in previous corporate investigations. "We need to understand exactly how deep this problem goes," Malcolm instructed the team. "I want every discrimination complaint filed in the last 5 years analyzed. Look for patterns in how they were handled and by whom." Sarah nodded, already typing on her laptop. I've started building a network map connecting the complaints, the employees involved, and the executives who made decisions about each case. There's something interesting already emerging. She turned her screen to show Malcolm a visualization that revealed an unusually high concentration of dismissed complaints routing through Harrison Reynolds' department. This isn't random, Malcolm observed. It's systemic. While Malcolm's team worked, Patricia Whitfield prepared for her press conference, unaware that her position was becoming increasingly precarious. Her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. It was Carter Wilson, the flight supervisor who had initially offered to stand by her. "Patricia, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "They're building a case against multiple employees, not just you. People are talking." Patricia felt her confidence waver. "What people? What are they saying?" "3 other flight attendants have given statements about past incidents they witnessed, and Malcolm's team is going through years of complaint records. This is bigger than just what happened with his daughter." Patricia's indignation flared. "They're just trying to save their own jobs by throwing me under the bus. I did nothing wrong." Carter's voice dropped lower. "Patricia, I need to tell you something. That day on the flight, when I said I'd support you, I was already recording our conversation for HR." The line went silent as Patricia absorbed this betrayal. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Because I saw the video, Patricia. I saw what really happened, and I've seen you do similar things before and said nothing. I can't be part of that anymore." After hanging up, Patricia paced her hotel room, her press conference strategy now in tatters. Her phone buzzed with a text from Harrison Reynolds. "Cannot continue direct communication. Legal advises distance. You're on your own." The support she had counted on was evaporating rapidly. At Zora's school, news of the incident had spread quickly among students and parents. What should have been a routine return to classes became instead a gauntlet of whispers and stares. Some classmates approached with sympathy and support, while others, particularly those from families with conservative political leanings, subtly suggested she had overreacted or played the race card. During lunch period, Zora sat alone until her best friend Lily Chen joined her. "Some of the 8th graders are saying awful things," Lily reported. "That you made it all up for attention, or that your dad is using you to push some agenda." Zora picked at her food, processing this information. "Dad says when people attack the victim instead of the perpetrator, it's because they're afraid of examining their own biases." Lily smiled. "Your dad is pretty smart." "Yeah," Zora agreed. "But it still hurts." Back at Skyway headquarters, Malcolm's investigation was uncovering disturbing evidence. Email records revealed that Patricia's personnel file had been sanitized multiple times, with complaint documentation mysteriously disappearing after reaching certain levels of management. More significantly, they discovered a private email group that included Harrison Reynolds and 4 other board members, explicitly discussing strategies to maintain the traditional culture of the airline against Malcolm's modernization efforts. In one particularly damning exchange, Reynolds had written, "Johnson's diversity obsession will destroy what made this airline great. We need to manage these complaints quietly until we can restore proper leadership." Malcolm read the emails, with a mixture of anger and vindication. This explains why Patricia felt so protected. She was the symptom, not the disease. His phone alerted him to breaking news. Patricia's planned press conference had been announced publicly. "Perfect timing," Malcolm remarked to Vanessa. "She's walking into a trap of her own making." As the investigation continued, digital forensics uncovered connections between Harrison Reynolds and Blake Thornton, the conservative pundit who had championed Patricia's cause. Financial records showed that Reynolds had made substantial contributions to Thornton's media foundation, suggesting the supportive coverage was far from coincidental. Hours before the scheduled board vote, Malcolm called an impromptu meeting with several key institutional investors who held significant Skyway stock. He presented the evidence his team had uncovered, focusing not on Patricia's individual actions, but on the systematic cover-up that had enabled discriminatory behavior to flourish. "This isn't just a moral issue," he explained to the investors. "It's a governance failure that puts your investment at risk." The people attempting this boardroom coup are the same ones who buried evidence that could have prevented dozens of incidents like what happened to my daughter. The investors, already concerned about the stock's recent volatility, were persuaded by Malcolm's presentation. By the time the board meeting convened that afternoon, Malcolm had secured enough proxy support to block the dilution attempt. Harrison. Reynolds arrived at the meeting expecting a victory, only to find the boardroom dynamics had shifted dramatically overnight. Malcolm opened the meeting with a bombshell. Before we proceed with any votes, I believe the board should review new evidence that has come to light regarding the systematic suppression of discrimination complaints within our company. He distributed tablets containing the most damning emails, watching as Reynolds and his allies realized their scheme had been exposed. Additionally, Malcolm continued, I've asked our legal counsel to prepare a report on potential violations of corporate governance standards and securities laws implied by these communications. The room fell silent as the implications sank. Reynolds attempted to regain control. These emails are being taken out of context, and regardless, they have no bearing on the financial decision before us today. Malcolm fixed him with a steady gaze. On the contrary, Harrison, they establish a clear pattern of decisions made not in the company's best interest, but to protect a discriminatory status quo. That goes directly to the question of whether this board is fulfilling its fiduciary responsibilities. The vote to dilute Malcolm's shares was tabled indefinitely as several board members, seeing which way the wind was blowing, publicly distanced themselves from Reynolds. Meanwhile, across town, Patricia stood at the podium for her press conference, unaware that her corporate support had evaporated. She began her prepared statement. I have dedicated 15 years of my life to providing excellent service to all Skyway passengers, regardless of race, gender, or background. What happened on that flight has been grossly mischaracterized by a powerful man using his influence to scapegoat a working-class woman. As she continued her defense, tweets began appearing with screenshots of the leaked emails mentioning her previous complaints. Reporters' phones buzzed with updates, and the mood in the room shifted palpably. Patricia faltered as she noticed the changing expressions of the journalists. One raised her hand, interrupting Patricia's statement. Ms. Whitfield, are you aware that emails have just leaked showing Skyway executives explicitly protected you from consequences after multiple prior discrimination complaints? The press conference devolved into chaos as Patricia realized too late that her narrative had collapsed. By day's end, the conspiracy that had protected discriminatory practices at Skyway Airlines lay exposed, with Malcolm Johnson firmly in control and prepared to implement the changes he had promised his daughter. The morning following the failed boardroom coup, Malcolm Johnson appeared calm and composed as he entered Skyway headquarters. Behind this serene exterior, however, was a meticulously crafted strategy that had been months in the making. Long before the incident involving Zora, Malcolm had sensed resistance to his vision for the airline and had quietly prepared contingencies. You seem surprisingly relaxed for someone who just survived an attempted corporate takeover, Vanessa Chen remarked as they reviewed the day's agenda. Malcolm allowed himself a small smile. Because this wasn't unexpected, Vanessa. From the moment I acquired the controlling interest, I knew some of the old guard would resist change. I just didn't know exactly how or when they'd make their move. He pulled up a document on his tablet. That's why I had our legal team draft these bylaw amendments 3 months ago. They were approved but never implemented, waiting for the right moment. Vanessa reviewed the document, her eyes widening. This gives the CEO authority to remove board members who act against the company's ethical standards or public interest. You were playing chess while they were playing checkers. And now, Malcolm added, we make our move. Across town, Zora was facing her own battles. Word had spread through her middle school about her role in the Skyway scandal, making her the subject of intense curiosity and, from some quarters, hostility. As she walked to her locker between classes, a group of 8th grade boys approached. Hey, Johnson, the tallest one called out. My dad says your dad is destroying a woman's life just because she didn't bow down to you. Is that what happens when people don't treat you like a princess? Zora felt her chest tighten, the familiar feeling of being singled out for her race, compounded by the personal nature of the attack. Before she could respond, Her history teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, appeared behind the boys. "That's enough, Tyler. Principal's office now." As the boys skulked away, Ms. Rodriguez turned to Zora. "Are you okay?" Zora nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly. "I'm used to it." The sadness in that simple statement wasn't lost on the teacher. You shouldn't have to be. No child should. At the Skyway Crew Hotel, Patricia Whitfield was attempting to salvage her reputation and career. Her disastrous press conference had been cut short when the leaked emails revealed the extent of the corporate protection she had enjoyed. Now, her union representative was advising her to accept a negotiated departure from the airline. "They're offering 6 months severance if you go quietly," the representative explained. "Given the circumstances, that's generous." Patricia's indignation remained strong despite her collapsing support system. "Generous? They're destroying my reputation. I'm the victim here." The union representative sighed. "Patricia, there are now 5 videos from different passengers showing your behavior on that flight. The evidence doesn't support your version of events." Unwilling to accept defeat, Patricia reached out to Harrison Reynolds, hoping her boardroom ally could still provide support. His assistant answered, informing her that Mr. Reynolds was unavailable indefinitely and suggesting she direct all communication through legal channels. Desperate, she contacted Blake Thornton, the conservative pundit who had championed her cause. To her surprise, he agreed to meet her that afternoon. Unknown to Patricia, Thornton saw an opportunity to advance his own agenda by further politicizing the incident, regardless of the facts. Meanwhile, Malcolm implemented the next phase of his plan. Rather than immediately firing the board members implicated in the discrimination cover-up, he invited them to an individual meeting. Harrison Reynolds was the first to arrive, his usual confidence diminished but not extinguished. "I assume this is where you ask for my resignation," he began as he took a seat across from Malcolm. Malcolm studied him thoughtfully. "Actually, Harrison, I'm offering you a choice. You can resign quietly with your reputation relatively intact, or you can stay and help implement the changes this airline desperately needs." Reynolds looked surprised. "Why would you want me to stay after what happened?" "Because transformation is more powerful when it includes former opponents," Malcolm explained. "And because your experience with this airline is valuable, even if your recent decisions weren't." He slid a tablet across the desk. "This is our new anti-discrimination framework. If you stay, you'll be expected to champion it publicly, and, honestly, if that's not something you can do with integrity, then resignation is the better path." Reynolds skimmed the document, his expression unreadable. "I'll need time to consider this." Malcolm nodded. "You have until tomorrow morning." One by one, he held similar conversations with each implicated board member, offering the same choice: authentic participation in change or graceful exit. By day's end, 3 had chosen to resign, while 2, including Reynolds, remained undecided. That evening, Patricia met with Blake Thornton at an upscale restaurant, hoping for a strategy to resurrect her public image. Thornton was all charm and sympathy. "Patricia, your story resonates with millions of Americans who feel targeted by woke culture. We can position you as the face of this fight." Patricia leaned forward eagerly. "How do we do that?" "I've prepared a statement that frames this as a direct attack on working-class white Americans. We'll release it tomorrow on my show, followed by a series of media appearances." What Thornton didn't mention was that his proposed narrative included several deliberately inflammatory claims about Malcolm and Zora that ranged from misleading to outright false. Patricia, seeing a lifeline, agreed without fully reviewing the content. At the Johnson home, Malcolm found Zora in their family library, surrounded by books about civil rights history. She looked up as he entered. "Dad, I've been thinking about something." "What's that, butterfly?" She gestured to the books. "All these people fought so hard for so long, but we're still dealing with the same problems. Does anything ever really change?" Malcolm sat beside her, considering the question seriously. "Change isn't linear, Zora. It comes in waves. Sometimes we make progress, then face backlash, then push forward again. But yes, things do change. Not always as quickly or completely as we'd like, but they do." He pointed to a photo of his own parents at a civil rights march. Your grandparents couldn't have imagined me owning an airline. And while what happened to you on that flight was terrible, the fact that so many people recognized it as wrong and spoke up is progress compared to what they experienced." Zora nodded, absorbing this perspective. "So what happens now with the airline?" "That depends partly on what you want," Malcolm replied. "This started because of what happened to you. Your voice matters in how we respond." The following morning, Patricia appeared on Blake Thornton's show, where she delivered the prepared statement painting herself as a victim of cancel culture and corporate politics. She claimed Malcolm was using his daughter to push a radical agenda and suggested Zora had exaggerated her medical condition for attention. Within hours, Malcolm's legal team had filed a defamation lawsuit on Zora's behalf, citing the provably false claims about her medical emergency. Back at Skyway headquarters, Harrison Reynolds made his decision, approaching Malcolm's office with measured steps. "I've thought about your offer," he began, "and I've decided to stay if you'll still have me." Malcolm assessed him carefully. "What changed your mind?" Reynolds hesitated, then spoke with unexpected candor. "My granddaughter. She's 12, just like your daughter. She called me last night after seeing the news and asked if I was one of the bad guys who protected the mean flight attendant. It made me realize I need to be someone she can be proud of." As Reynolds left the office, Vanessa entered with breaking news. Patricia just made serious false claims about Zora on national television. "Our legal team is already responding." Malcolm reviewed the clip, his expression hardening. "She's made her choice then. No more attempts at reconciliation." He turned to face the Atlanta skyline, his reflection superimposed over the city below. It's time to end this chapter and begin the real work of transformation. The morning of Patricia Whitfield's second press conference dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the gathering storm in her professional life. Following her appearance on Blake Thornton's show, she had been inundated with messages from conservative supporters praising her courage in standing up to what they perceived as corporate wokeism. Bolstered by this validation, she had called a follow-up press conference to present what she claimed was evidence that would exonerate her and expose Malcolm Johnson's true agenda. The hotel conference room was packed with journalists, many drawn by Patricia's provocative claims and the viral nature of the story. She approached the podium with rehearsed confidence, a folder of documents in hand. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "Today I will present conclusive evidence that Skyway Airlines, under Malcolm Johnson's leadership, has created a hostile work environment for employees like myself who simply uphold traditional values and standards." She opened her folder with a flourish. "I have here internal communications showing that Mr. Johnson had targeted me for termination long before the incident with his daughter, due to my resistance to lowered service standards disguised as cultural sensitivity." As Patricia began to read from what appeared to be company emails, a murmur spread through the assembled journalists. Several were checking their phones, where breaking news was developing in real time. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution interrupted. "Ms. Whitfield, are you aware that Skyway Airlines has just released audio recordings of your conversations with Flight Supervisor Carter Wilson and board member Harrison Reynolds?" Patricia faltered, caught off guard. "What recordings?" "Recordings in which you acknowledge ignoring the child's requests for water and make several racially charged comments. They've been authenticated and are being played on CNN right now." The press conference descended into chaos as journalists scrambled to verify the new information. Patricia stood frozen at the podium, watching her carefully constructed narrative collapse around her. The documents she had presented, which she claimed were internal communications, were quickly revealed to be selectively edited and in some cases fabricated. Malcolm Johnson had anticipated this move. Since the incident, he had been meticulously gathering evidence, including recordings made by Carter Wilson during their conversations on the flight and afterward. Additionally, Harrison Reynolds, as part of his redemption arc, had surrendered recordings of his own conversations with Patricia, in which she had made explicitly biased statements about passengers of color. At Skyway headquarters, Malcolm addressed the company's executives in the main conference room, his manner calm but resolute. "Today marks a turning point for our airline," he began. The evidence released this morning makes it clear that what happened to my daughter was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of behavior that was known and tolerated at multiple levels of our organization. He gestured to a large screen, displaying a comprehensive anti-discrimination framework. This is the Skyway Accountability Initiative. It includes mandatory bias training for all employees, a transparent complaint investigation process overseen by an independent review board, and clear consequences for discriminatory behavior. There were murmurs of both approval and concern among the executives. Malcolm continued, "Some of you may wonder why I didn't simply fire Ms. Whitfield and move on. The reason is simple. Removing one person doesn't fix a broken system. This isn't about punishing an individual. It's about transforming a culture." The initiative he outlined was sweeping, touching every aspect of the airline's operations from hiring practices to customer service protocols. It established regular audits to identify potential bias in how passengers were treated, and created anonymous reporting channels for employees to flag concerns without fear of retaliation. Most significantly, it tied executive compensation directly to diversity and inclusion metrics, ensuring leadership had a personal stake in creating meaningful change. As the meeting concluded, several industry reporters were waiting outside for Malcolm's statement on Patricia's failed press conference. Rather than focusing on her, Malcolm used the opportunity to announce the Skyway Accountability Initiative publicly. Today, we're not just addressing a single incident, but making a commitment to our passengers and employees that Skyway will lead the industry in creating an equitable, respectful environment for everyone. The response was immediate and largely positive. Industry analysts noted that while the initiative would require significant investment, it positioned Skyway as a leader in corporate responsibility at a time when consumers increasingly considered a company's values in their purchasing decisions. The story took another turn when the Department of Transportation announced it was launching an investigation into discrimination complaints across all major airlines, citing the Skyway incident as a catalyst. Meanwhile, Patricia Whitfield faced mounting legal challenges. Beyond losing her job, she now confronted a defamation lawsuit from the Johnsons and potential criminal charges in France for endangering a minor by withholding medical assistance. Blake Thornton, sensing the shifting tide, quickly distanced himself from Patricia, claiming he had been misled about the facts and removing the interview from his website. Carter Wilson, whose recordings had proved instrumental in establishing the truth, found himself in a complicated position. While his evidence had helped expose Patricia's behavior, it also revealed his own failure to intervene earlier. Malcolm offered him a choice similar to what he had presented to Harrison Reynolds: resignation or participation in reforming the company culture. "You didn't create the problem, but you were part of the system that allowed it to continue," Malcolm told him. "Now you have a chance to be part of the solution." Carter chose to stay, accepting a demotion and a role in implementing the new accountability measures. 6 weeks after the incident, the airline industry was still feeling its effects. Several major carriers announced their own diversity initiatives, though none as comprehensive as Skyway's. Malcolm was invited to speak at an industry conference about corporate responsibility, where he emphasized that meaningful change required more than policy updates. It requires a fundamental shift in how we view our responsibilities to each other, he explained. Discrimination doesn't just hurt its direct victims, it poisons entire organizational cultures and ultimately damages the bottom line. At home, Malcolm and Zora continued to process what had happened and its far-reaching consequences. "Sometimes I feel guilty," Zora confessed one evening. "So many people's jobs changed because of what happened to me." Malcolm sat beside her, on the porch swing of their home. "The changes were necessary, Butterfly. They would have been necessary whether it happened to you or someone else. You just had the courage to speak up when many others couldn't." Zora considered this. "Do you think Patricia will ever understand what she did wrong?" Malcolm sighed. "I don't know. Some people can face their biases and grow from that recognition. Others build more elaborate defenses to avoid self-reflection. What matters is that her actions can't harm others in the same way anymore." As they sat together watching the sunset, news alerts appeared on Malcolm's phone. Patricia's final attempt to reframe the narrative had failed completely, with her legal representation withdrawing after the release of the authenticated recordings. Justice, in its complex and imperfect way, was taking flight at last. 6 months after the incident that sparked international headlines, Skyway Airlines had transformed in ways few could have predicted. The company's stock, which had initially plummeted during the crisis, had not only recovered, but exceeded its previous value as investors responded positively to the airline's new direction and the transparent implementation of the accountability initiative. Malcolm Johnson sat in his office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, reviewing the quarterly report on discrimination complaints. The data showed a 57% decrease in reported incidents and, more significantly, a complete shift in how those complaints were handled. Every report now received a thorough investigation by an independent panel, with clear communication to all parties throughout the process. "The numbers are encouraging," noted Imani Washington, who had been promoted to Executive Vice President of Culture and Inclusion, a position with direct reporting lines to Malcolm and the board. "But what's most impressive is the change in employee feedback. People feel heard in ways they never did before." Malcolm nodded in agreement. "And passenger satisfaction scores are at their highest point in 5 years. It turns out treating people with dignity is good business." Harrison Reynolds entered the office, his demeanor markedly different from the confrontational board member of 6 months prior. His decision to stay and support the transformation had surprised many, but his expertise in operations had proved valuable in implementing the new policies without disrupting the airline's efficiency. The industry peer review just came in. Reynolds announced, "Skyway is being recognized as the leading carrier for inclusion initiatives. 3 other airlines have requested our framework as a model." Malcolm allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. "That's the real change, Harrison, when what we're doing here spreads beyond our walls." Across town, Zora Johnson stood before her middle school assembly, addressing her peers with the poise of someone beyond her 12 years. In the months following the incident, she had worked with child psychologists to process her trauma and had eventually decided to channel her experience into advocacy. With her father's support, she had created the Altitude Initiative, a program designed to help young people recognize and respond to discrimination in their daily lives. "What happened to me on that airplane could happen to anyone," she told her fellow students. "But what matters isn't just what happened, but how we respond to it. Each of us has the power to speak up when we see someone being treated unfairly." The audience included teachers, parents, and representatives from other schools interested in implementing the program. Among them was Dorothy Chambers, the elderly passenger who had been one of the first to speak up for Zora on the flight. They had maintained contact, with Dorothy becoming something of a mentor to Zora in her advocacy work. After the assembly, Dorothy approached with proud tears in her eyes. "Your speech was wonderful, dear. You've turned something painful into something powerful." Zora hugged her, grateful for the support that had emerged from unexpected places. Meanwhile, Patricia Whitfield's story had taken a different turn. After losing her defamation countersuit and facing mounting legal fees, she had largely retreated from public view. The criminal charges in France had been resolved with a suspended sentence and community service requirement, on the condition that she complete comprehensive bias education programming. Though she had initially resisted, the process had gradually prompted some reflection. While she had not publicly acknowledged the racial components of her actions, she had stopped claiming complete innocence and had begun to recognize how her behavior had endangered a child. Her former colleagues at Skyway had moved forward under the new policies. Carter Wilson, after his initial demotion, had committed himself to the reform process with unexpected dedication. He now led training sessions for flight supervisors on intervention strategies, teaching them how to identify and address discriminatory behavior before it escalated. "I stood by once when I should have spoken up," he often began his sessions. "I'm here to make sure none of you make the same mistake." The airline industry as a whole had been forced to confront its record on discrimination. The Department of Transportation investigation had expanded to include all major carriers, resulting in new federal guidelines for handling discrimination complaints and protecting passengers' rights. Malcolm had testified before a congressional committee, sharing Skyway's journey and the positive business outcomes of their diversity initiatives. On a crisp autumn morning, Malcolm and Zora prepared to board a Skyway flight to Paris, returning to the city that had been the site of both trauma and the beginning of transformation. This time, however, the circumstances were entirely different. They were traveling to accept an international humanitarian award for the Altitude Initiative, which had expanded beyond schools to include youth programs in 5 countries. As they approached the boarding gate, the lead flight attendant, a woman named Maya Williams, greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Johnson and Mr. Johnson. It's an honor to have you flying with us today." Zora smiled in return, no longer anxious about the treatment she might receive. The crew on this flight reflected the airline's transformed culture, diverse in background but unified in their commitment to treating all passengers with equal respect and attention. Once settled in their seats, Zora turned to her father. "It's weird, coming back to Paris like this. Last time everything was so scary and awful." Malcolm nodded, understanding. "And now?" Zora thought for a moment. "Now it feels like we turned something bad into something important. Like what happened to me mattered, but doesn't define me." "That's exactly right, Butterfly," Malcolm agreed, feeling a surge of pride in his daughter's wisdom and resilience. "The test of character isn't what happens to us, but what we build from it." As the plane ascended into the clear blue sky, Malcolm reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. What had begun as a personal trauma for his daughter had catalyzed changes that would benefit thousands of passengers and employees. The incident had exposed painful truths about how discrimination persisted in subtle and not so subtle forms, but it had also revealed the possibility of meaningful transformation when leaders committed to genuine accountability. Looking at Zora, now confidently chatting with the passenger beside her about the Altitude Initiative, Malcolm recognized that the true measure of their success wasn't in the policy changes or the improved metrics, significant though they were. It was in the restoration of his daughter's sense of security and dignity, and in the knowledge that their experience had made the world a little more just for others who might have suffered in silence. As the coastline of France appeared on the horizon, both father and daughter looked toward the future with hope, knowing that their story had helped justice take flight in ways they could never have imagined. This powerful story illuminates several profound truths about racism and systemic discrimination in our modern world. First, it demonstrates how privilege can insulate some from facing consequences for discriminatory behavior, while leaving others vulnerable to life-threatening situations. Patricia's long history of unchallenged bias shows how institutions often protect those who discriminate, rather than those who suffer from it. Second, the story reveals that meaningful change requires more than removing one bad apple. As Malcolm recognized, Patricia's behavior was merely a symptom of deeper organizational issues. True transformation demands examining and reconstructing the systems that enable discrimination to flourish unchecked. Third, we see the power of evidence in the digital age. Without Marcus's video recording, Patricia's behavior might have been dismissed as Zora's misinterpretation. In today's connected world, documentation can be a powerful tool for accountability, forcing difficult conversations that might otherwise be avoided. Perhaps most importantly, this story highlights the burden placed on victims of discrimination to advocate for themselves and others. Zora, at just 12 years old, was forced to confront racism while experiencing a life-threatening medical emergency. Her courage in speaking up, "Is it because I'm Black?" created a catalyst for change that benefited countless others. Finally, the narrative underscores that allyship matters. The elderly passenger Dorothy, the doctor, and others who spoke up made a crucial difference. Their willingness to use their voices demonstrated that combating racism isn't just the responsibility of those who experience it, but of everyone who witnesses it. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered if you should speak up? Comment below with "I will speak up" if this story has inspired you to be more courageous in confronting injustice when you see it. Has someone ever stood up for you when you faced unfair treatment? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might encourage others who are struggling. If you believe in creating a world where no one faces discrimination based on their race, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose injustice and celebrate resilience. Remember, change happens through both big systematic reforms and small everyday actions of courage. Thank you for watching this powerful journey of transformation. May we all find the courage of Zora to speak truth to power, the wisdom of Malcolm to address root causes rather than symptoms, and the conviction to build a more just world for everyone. Until next time, keep standing up for what's right, even when your voice shakes.